Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. This is Hannah from HannahMariaPlans, and today we're going to take a look at some new paint and then create a November weekly spread. I've been using watercolours now for a little over a year, but I've never really used any other types of paint. When I first started using the Archer and Olive notebook back in October, I was disappointed with the way it handled water. As a result, I started mixing the watercolour with white gouache to give it a thicker consistency, which has worked really well. It seems to sit on top of the paper rather than soaking in, so you don't get the same problems with the paint bleeding through. One of the problems I found with this is that although it makes wonderful pastels, it doesn't let me mix dark and saturated colours. After searching around, I decided to buy this affordable student-grade gouache set by MIYA. It comes in this lovely pale turquoise case which has locking edges, a plastic mixing surface which lifts out from the lid, and most importantly, 18 pots each containing 30 ml of paint. That is a huge amount of paint, bearing in mind that all of the watercolour tubes I have are only 15 ml. It was also incredibly affordable, working out at about £1 per pot of paint. To get to the paint itself, you have to peel the foil lids off the little jelly pots, which is so fiddly. The paint has a tendency to squidge out the side, which made it a messy operation, and I think by the end my hands were pretty covered despite trying to wipe it off in between. I really liked the colours selected in the set, and I can tell already that having 2 pots of white will be really useful with the way that I have been painting. The second white is the pot that I haven't unpeeled. Although the locking lid should make the palette airtight so the paint shouldn't dry out, I think it makes sense not to risk it and only to open it when the first one has run out. After rearranging the colours in my preferred order in the palette, I decided to make a little swatch of each colour on a scrap piece of watercolour paper. I wanted to see what the colours looked like out of their pots and to see if they changed much between being wet and dry. It also helped me to pick the colour I wanted to use in my weekly spread, which is this Prussian blue right here. As you might remember from my last video, my current theme is clouds. This week I wanted to do a night sky inspired by one of my favourite artists on Instagram, Sosha Creates, featuring one large cloud and some metallic rain. I really enjoy paintings in my journal that take up the whole page and have Dutch doors revealing my calendar. I always think they stick out when I'm flicking back through and make a big statement. For those of you that might not know, a Dutch door is where you cut away part of a page so that you might be able to incorporate it into a different page. There are lots of different types, but because I'm doing it on both sides of the page, this would technically be a double Dutch door. I didn't realise that this was such a mouthful until I said it out loud. First of all, I lightly draw out my design and then count in the number of squares from each side, making sure it's equal. For those that would like to know, I have counted in 9 of the 5mm squares. Once I'm happy with my layout, I'll grab my craft knife and cutting board and place it underneath the page I want to cut through. Because the paper is so thick, it normally takes a couple of strokes for me to get through the page. Once I've cut it all away, I mark the page underneath to coincide with the page above. I like to go an extra square towards the middle on each side, so I have some leeway with my wonky cutting lines and won't have white showing between the pages. Because I'm going to be painting on all of this, the other thing I like to do to protect the page a bit more is to line the edges with washi tape. I find it helps stop me getting paint absolutely everywhere, but it's by no means a perfect solution, as you'll see later on. The first step of the painting itself was covering everything in blue. The gouache I'm using here is a Prussian blue, which is not a colour I've used before. I diluted it with a bit of water so it was less thick and used a flat brush to just lay it down. I've blended it with white gouache as you go down the page to give a nice gradient effect. One thing I always find challenging with these double Dutch doors is when to paint the bit underneath. If I do it too early, then I will inevitably be too impatient to let it dry before I let the top page close on top of it, and I'll have a splodgy blue mess. One way around this is using a heat tool or a hairdryer, and another is just to work on the top layers and then the bottom layers one at a time. I tend to find if I work on the layers separately, it will look less cohesive because I just can't colour match it close enough. The way the cloud divides this spread, and knowing I'll be adding lots of extra details, I decided to do a mix of the two. I'm hoping that as I get more used to using gouache, I'll be able to create more complex paintings. For me, it feels very different to using watercolour, even though they're both water-based paints. It's really nice to be able to build up lighter colours over dark because of the increased opacity, which isn't something you can do with watercolour paint, but because I'm so inexperienced with it, everything feels very clunky. I expect that whilst I'm using an Archer and Olive journal, I'll try to use more gouache if I'm painting directly onto the pages. Like I said earlier, it sits on top of the page as opposed to sinking straight in and bleeding through, which not only makes it more aesthetically pleasing, it also makes it a much less frustrating experience. Let me know below if you'd like me to post a full review and chat about my thoughts on the Archer and Olive journal. There is a lot of content out there on this notebook, and whilst I am enjoying using it, I found I actually disagree with a lot of what has been said. Here I've created the clouds by swirling bits of blue, white and grey on the paper whilst it is still wet so I can blend it more easily. I tried to pick the shadows out with the grey and the highlights out with the white, which includes the very top where the light might hit it. This helps give it more of a fluffy 3D effect. To create the grey I'm using for the clouds, I used a little bit of brown to neutralise the blue. I find that mixing my own colours rather than using a grey straight out of the tube makes a painting much more cohesive, but it takes me a bit of trial and error to get it right. For that reason, I always have a scrap bit of paper to test my colours out before I put the brush to paper. Once everything is dry, I can remove all the tape, and here you can see where I've managed to make a bit of a mess. I can't do anything about the blue on my to-do list, but on the white pages I can just use a bit more white gouache to hide it. Once I've written over the top, I barely notice that it's there. I'm using a ruler and a Uni Signo silver gel pen to make my lines of rain, being careful not to smudge it as I go. I find that gel pens always take longer than I expect to dry, and quickly switched my place so I could go all the way from right to the left side of the page rather than going back on myself. The finishing touches of the artwork are adding the stars to the sky using a white Posca paint pen. I always find that the stars make the spread feel much more complete and just alive. You can see the edge of the page curling up where it's been cut, which is very normal when it's had such a large amount of wet medium put on it. I find that once the journal is closed, it flattens out again pretty quickly, but if you're struggling, you can always put some extra weights on it overnight, which will sort it right out. The very last steps are adding in the days of the week. I find this layout is great for my busier weeks because it gives me a lot of space to write out all of my events and tasks. For those of you that haven't yet heard, I am so excited to announce that I have managed to launch my Etsy shop, which I will link below. There are currently some hand-painted Christmas cards in stock, and I'm starting to upload print and digital downloads too. If there's anything in particular you'd like to see, then please let me know, and if you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing so you can see more content. It's nearly time to get stuck into my December plan with me, and I am so ready to get feeling Christmassy. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye guys.